prequel trilogy in a lot of ways doesn't really matter, even though it's Star Wars, which still makes it awesome.
Yeah.
But, pardon me, I'm gonna burp. Too much, big gulp here.
Too much turkey.
Too much, yes, too much turkey. But I completely lost my train of thought, man.
Okay, well, we're gonna give you a few ideas of why they actually believe that Jar Jar Binks was a Sith Lord, and I think all these actually kind of emphasize why it was very important that fans should have shut up and let George Lucas continue what he was doing. The man is a genius. The man knew what he was doing.
I'm not sure I've ever necessarily referred to George Lucas as being a genius.
I do. Shut up. The man who brought us Star Wars has to be labeled as a genius.
He is the godfather of modern science fiction, to be sure.
So okay, basically, and the whole thing of Z-Quan is the stumbling and staggering, deceptive, unpredictable.
Which kind of, describes Jar Jar Binks.
Exactly. He was most dangerous when he was in danger. He was able to drunkenly destroy pretty much half the droid army in seconds just by accident.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and as has been pointed out by Obi-Wan Kenobi himself in A New Hope, in his experience, speaking of Obi-Wan, there is no such thing as luck.
Yes, exactly. Everything pretty much comes down to pure luck, but there is no such thing as luck, especially in the Star Wars universe. Nothing that has ever happened in the Star Wars universe is by pure luck. It is by skill, it is by power, and it is by the Force. And Jar Jar Binks is the exact same way. There was a scene in, I believe, Tatooine, where he was he falls off the bridge, and he somehow...
That's actually,
Naboo.
That's on Naboo, yeah.
Sorry, yes. I'm thinking Tatooine, I don't know why. It's a very funky word.
It's interesting because if you look at the scene, Jar Jar looks like he's falling from the bridge. But when he eventually drops to the ground, he's not on the side that he was started off with. He was off onto what would have been the left side, the right hand side of the screen when he slipped off the bridge. But then when he drops beside the Jedi, he is on their right side, which would be closer to the left hand side of the screen. So he would have literally had to jump across to get over top of the Jedi.
Yeah, it's not uncommon if you look at a lot of the Jedi, they do force jumps, quite frequently. And that's basically what Jar Jar did, was a force jump. And actually, if you look at the droids, they are shooting at where Jar Jar was. And as soon as he lands, their heads snap to where he is. So, it almost shows the fact that he had jumped from where he was, not fallen. Which is, I think, a very unique aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. It was amazing because as I was watching this video that we were kind of using as reference for this. A lot of the things that, that Vincent Valentine was discussing, just like made me think, oh my god, why didn't I think about this before?
Yeah, and actually, when they started talking about the sleight of hand, him mumbling in the background, I started actually rethinking about, all things that happened while I was watching this movie, and I have to go back and rewatch this now so I can see Jar Jar Binks in a different light.
Yeah, absolutely.
But every time a major decision is made, he is mumbling in the background, or he is standing beside them.
Or he's standing beside them, and just the amount of hand gestures that Jar Jar Binks goes. Now, that doesn't necessarily make you a Sith Lord. You see a lot of hand gestures. There's a lot of different nationalities that go off and they use hand gestures a lot. Italians use quite a bit with the hand gestures. But when you're talking about Star Wars, it just, when, several different situations here where, Jar Jar happens to be around. For instance, when Queen Amidala is kind of faced with a dilemma as to what to do, you see Jar Jar Binks standing there and around her or beside her talking about how great the Gungans are. and he's like waving his hand in her
Yeah,
presence.
he basically he has been a force behind going to war against the droid army, and also Palpatine being in power. Without Jar Jar influence on both those events, neither would have happened, and Star Wars would not be the way it was. So it is unique.
It's definitely unique. And now the question, of course, would be, well, if Jar Jar was, why was Jar Jar, portrayed as being such a goofball? Well, I mean, as it was pointed out, I mean, if you have seen The Empire Strikes Back, of course, you realize that when Luke Skywalker first meets Yoda, Yoda seems to be a very silly, stupid character.
Yes,
But it's only revealed,
of
several minutes later on into the film that, I mean, it was Yoda just going off and testing Luke.
yeah, and exactly, and it was so much. Yoda wasn't entirely sure if he, you know, trusted Luke enough to show his true power. He wanted to see Luke as if he was a regular person.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't think we actually wrote down the actual quote for this, but George Lucas kind of discussed it as finding uh, an unassuming
Drunken, bumbling fool.
well, an unassuming character on the side of the or unassuming character or creature on the side of the road who turns out to be the Grand Wizard or Master or whatever. And if you look at the way the Star Wars trilogy was done, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the prequel trilogy that kind of mirrors what happened in the original trilogy. And so, of course, where would be this unassuming character that turns out to be, the Grand Master? That would be Jar Jar.
Yeah, and
Or could be Jar Jar.
I honestly believe that Jar Jar Binks should have continued along this path of becoming the Sith Lord, because I would have rather seen a fight between Yoda and Jar Jar Binks over Count Dooku. I think Count Dooku was very poorly done. I don't think he was a very necessary aspect of the story.
You know what? I don't know. I mean, this kind of bothers me because I happen to be a very big fan of the late great Christopher Lee, and so the fact that George Lucas managed to find a really great role for Christopher Lee to get his acting chops into was great. But I mean, if you look at it, it did seem kind of almost rushed a little bit
Yeah.
for him to be brought in. I mean, and big part of this would seem to be that there was a backlash, not just against Jar Jar, but against the entire Gungan race, which a lot of people were screaming racist because of the pidgin English that he went off and used.
Yes, there definitely was a lot of issues on the Gungans. I personally thought the Gungans were very well done, and I will admit I did do a little backlash towards Jar Jar Binks. I because of the fact of how they put him in as a main character so fast, and then seemingly gone in the second episode.
Well, again, there was such a big backlash, because if you look at it, Jar Jar Binks is a major character in the first movie. His role is still significant in Attack of the Clones because he is the one who is responsible for getting the Senate to go off and to give Palpatine full control. But then in the third movie, he has no lines whatsoever, and we only see him in the background on a couple of occasions.
Yes, and I think honestly, like, people needed to give him a lot more chance to develop into this better character that George Lucas planned and foresaw him being. Patience is virtue when it comes to the Star Wars universe.
Absolutely.
Did it, everybody balked at C-3PO. When he first came in, and look at the huge influence that he has become.
I don't know if people necessarily balked on him. I do know that the way that George Lucas wrote C-3PO and the way that Anthony Daniels went off and did it were completely different. In the book adaptation that he went off and did with the script, C-3PO comes across much more snooty and much more arrogant than C-3PO comes across in the movie, where he seems to be very self-loathing. And I mean, he comes across better. I honestly, I think Anthony Daniels played him right, because I don't think he would have been as big of a hit as a character if he had went as originally written.
Yeah.
But I mean, going back, there's a couple things I don't completely agree with as far as this. Like, there's the theory that the real reason why he was kicked out of Gunga City was because of how powerful he was, and people feared him.
Yes.
And I don't that part. Of this theory, I kind of question because it seems kind of ridiculous.
I'm going to cut you off. We are going to go to a quick music break while we pretty much,
I'm gonna have to take a couple of deep breaths.
Take a breath, and we get back into this in, a little short while. So enjoy our music, and we'll be right back with more Jar Jar Binks. Welcome back, and of course we got more Jar Jar Binks because this has been the most Jar Jar Binks since Jar Jar Binks came out, and that's really sad.
If you had told me a month ago that we were going to go off and dedicate a full episode of our podcast to Jar Jar Binks, I would have smacked you.
Yeah, honestly, I would have probably smacked myself too. I definitely was not, a huge Jar Jar Binks fan because I don't think they portrayed him as the best way as they could, and not just from the first episode. I would have loved to see him as this huge Sith, not just because it would explain so much, but wouldn't it have been awesome to see someone who befriended the Jedi and did all this stuff actually being the most powerful Sith Lord ever?
Absolutely. I mean, they talk about how there was only two, the master and the apprentice, and they always assumed who did they get. Now, the interesting thing that a lot of people may not realize who haven't read any of the books is that it was very common for both the masters and the apprentices to have secret apprentices that they would use towards their own ideas, their own plans to eventually, kill the other. It was always the theory that always was the plan that eventually the apprentice would have to try to kill the master, and he would either succeed or he would fail, and then a new apprentice would have to be found.
Yeah, see, and the only problem I have with Jar Jar Binks potentially being that Sith Lord is the rule of two. Because, obviously we had Palpatine, we also had, Darth Maul. So you couldn't really have that huge shadowing figure over top of it because of that rule of two. So, it really kind of complicates that whole theory that Jar Jar Binks was a Sith Lord.
This is true, yes. But you never know. Again, going back to the theology of the Sith here. Now, I know a lot of this stuff that I'm thinking of. It was from what is now referred to as the Legends. What was formerly the expanded universe for Star Wars, now just Legends. But in the Legends, again, it was a very common thing that that the Jedi's would go off and have secret, or not the Jedi's, the Sith would have secret apprentices. Palpatine apparently had several at one point who he referred to as being the Hand. But again, that is now just pure legend, of course.
Well, the whole thing about Star Wars is always, a legend here, legend there. So, maybe Jar Jar Binks was, kind of the exception of the rule of two. Maybe being an all-knowing, all-powerful, Sith Lord kind of makes you the exception.
Well, it could be. Now, what's I think is interesting is if you go back a couple of years ago, Robot Chicken actually played around with this idea. They actually dedicated a whole special to Star Wars, and one of the things is at the very end of this Palpatine is falling to his doom in the middle of the Death Star, and he goes up and he picks up a phone or something, calls Jar Jar, and